Hi, everyone. Welcome to our Microsoft Excel Introduction to Data Analytics through LearnIt. Really appreciate you joining us on this journey. My name is Elissa Smith. I am a Microsoft facilitator with over 20 years of experience teaching Microsoft tools. And Excel is a fantastic platform, but it's also really great at helping us view our data in different ways. We're going to be exploring things that go beyond the simple and average tools of Excel. We're going to be looking at table formatting, being able to view our data in different ways with conditional formatting. We're also going to look at some of Excel's conditional functions and even pivot tables, which are one of my favorite Outlook tools. The neat thing about most of these tools is they're all really pretty easy to utilize. So please join us on this journey. Hi everyone. In this session, what we want to do is look at how we can get Excel data ready to become a table. Now right here I have a very simple data set, and if you'd like to try this out, if you go into the practice folder and open up customer data-1A, you can follow along, but you'll notice that this data is very simple. It's really not ready for anything. If I look at it, for example, there are no column headers. Also, it doesn't really help me know what the data is. So we want to look at how we can prepare this data before we actually make it into a table. One of the first things I need to do is add column headers at the top. It's also really important that if I do have titles at the top of my data, I separate those titles for the data set by a couple of rows. But I just want to put in some column headers. So I'm going to come up here to the top, right click, and then insert a new blank row. This row will become my column header. Now, why are column headers so important? The reason they're so important is that they help to represent all the data underneath the column header. So if I don't know what a column is, I need to figure it out so that I can appropriately name my columns. Now you'll see that this data is actually about customers and different things that they have purchased. So I'm coming in and I'm naming again, the different columns based on the data type underneath. Now, this brings up another important topic. You'll notice that as I name these, all the data underneath is the same type of data. For example, here I have a phone column, as you can see here. It's not going to be, for example, the date that someone purchased something. This is the phone column. And this right here is going to be if there was a commission paid. Now, these are just normally formatted columns at this point. The other thing I'm going to do is take that column and I'm going to put it in bold. Now, very simple step, but again, it will become very important when we start getting our data ready to turn into a table. So again, get your column headers in there, and that will help you be prepared when you do turn on the table style. Hi, everybody. Welcome back. We want to take our data and continue to prepare it to become a table in Excel. There are a few things that are really important when you're going to be turning data into a table, because these are things that can impact the quality of your data. One of them is blank rows. And as you look at this data set, you'll see that there are quite a few blank rows in my data. Blank rows are a real no-no when you're applying a table style or even creating a pivot table in Excel, because what often happens when you have a blank row in your data is that Excel cannot analyze past that point. It's kind of like a breaking point in your data. Another thing that can be also bad is to have redundant data. This could be where one or two, again, cells in your data have the same information per column, or it could be happening multiple times. So we're going to check this data set for both of those things. Now, keep in mind that if you want to try this out, go into our practice files and open up customer data-2A, and you can try out this. The first thing we're going to do is remove the blank rows. Now, there are many ways to do this, but one of them, if you're just dealing with entire blank rows, like you see here in my data, I have lots of those. You can actually search for blank rows or blank cells in your data. So I have clicked in my data, and then I'm going to open up the Go To box. This is simply Control G, which stands for Go To. Now, normally we use this to go to specific cells, but in this case, I need it to help me locate a special item, which is going to include any cells that are blank. Now, in my case, I just have entire blank rows. If you have blank cells, this will also select those, so be careful with that. When I click on OK, You'll notice what it's done is in my data, it's highlighted where there are blank rows, and we can see that as I scroll through the data. Now, a really simple way to get rid of those rows is to go inside one of the selected rows, right-click, and then go down to delete. It's right beneath insert, and it's going to delete all those blank rows out. Now, it's also really important to decide how they should be removed. I'm going to ask it to shift the existing cells up, and you'll notice this is going to downsize my data, which is exactly what I wanted it to do, because those blank rows will impact the analysis once I apply my table style. Now, the second thing we mentioned is to remove any duplicates inside the data set. Now, I could go through and check for that kind of stuff, but it would take forever. And this is not a very long data set. It's only about 61 rows down. So I'm going to let Excel do that for me. Again, it's a great idea to already have column headings when you do this because it helps Excel to recognize what type of data is located in each column. Also, we're going to click inside one of the columns of data. I'm not going to want to click over here in column K, for example, because there is no data to analyze. So after I click inside my data set, I'm going to go up to the Data ribbon tab. There's a lot of great tools to help you with analysis on the Data ribbon tab of Excel. Now, if you come over to the right-hand side, you'll notice there's a Data Tools group, and this group of buttons is all about helping get your data ready for analysis. One of the tools that I have here is a great tool called Remove Duplicates, and I'm going to go ahead and click on that. Now, right here, I'm seeing my different column headings. And this helps, again, Excel to recognize the data underneath. It's going to look through all of them for redundant data. You'll notice it's telling me that it's found 4 different duplicate values. That means I've got up to 4 different rows of data that are being duplicated. I'm going to remove those. Now notice that if I now look at the data, I've only got 57 rows of data, or I should say 56 because we have our column headers, and it's cleared out that redundant data. Because when I start to analyze things, I don't want duplicates inside my data set. As always, we'd love to have you continue to follow us on this journey. So if you want to try it out, remember to go to the practice files and open up customer data-2b, and you can try it out. Hi everyone, I'm almost ready to make this Excel data into a table, but before I do that, there's one more thing that I want to check. You'll see right now in my data that I have a column A, that's the last name, and a column B, that's the first name. And I'd really like first and last name to be combined before I apply a table style to my data set. Now, this can be a little bit tricky. There are formulas that you can use. There's also actually a tool inside the data group, but I want to show you a newer tool called Flash Fill that makes this into a breeze. It's actually pretty fun. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come into my data. And remember, if you want to follow along and try this on your own, go into the practice files folder and open up customer data-3A, and you can do it. But I'm going to insert a new blank row for this new combined column. I'm going to come right here and right click on column C and just insert my new blank column. I'll widen it out just a little bit, and I'm going to just call it name. Again, it's a combination of last name and first name. Now, the thing that's critical when you use this tool, it's called Flash Fill, is that you type the entries exactly as they're spelled to the left. So if they're misspelled, you need to misspell them. In this case, I'm using people's names. So it's important that as I start typing in the first name, I type it in exactly as it appears to the left. Now, as soon as I come in and start typing in the next name, Microsoft Excel recognizes that I'm creating a pattern. And it says, hey, can I help you with that? Now, if I hit enter, boom, it already fills all the information in for me. But let's pretend it doesn't. Now, this could be for 2 reasons. Number 1, I may have misspelled Muriel, or Flash Fill just doesn't click in. If it doesn't, you can actually force Flash Fill. To do that, I'm going to come up to my Data ribbon tab. And on the Data ribbon tab in the Data Tools group, I'm going to look for the button that has a lightning bolt next to it. This is the Flash Fill button. I'm going to click on that, and you'll notice then it will force the Flash Fill. There's also a keyboard shortcut for Flash Fill, which is Control-E as in elephant. There's no connection between that and Flash Fill. That's just the keyboard shortcut they've applied to it. Notice if you hover on the button, it will give you that shortcut. But again, notice now I have combined those 2 fields to the left. Flash fill will both add fields together, it will separate them apart. It's a really fun tool to play with. Now for me, I can go ahead and delete the 2 columns to the left because I won't need them anymore. And now my data set is ready for me to apply my table style. Hey everyone, welcome back. My data in Excel is finally ready for me to apply what is called an Excel table or a table style. Now, what exactly is a table style? A table style does provide formatting, but more importantly, it allows you to analyze the data inside of that table with things like sorting, filtering, even quick calculations. So the formatting is an added bonus to me, but it's the analysis of tables that really make them a powerful tool. It's almost like you're making your Excel data into a little mini database. Now, we've spent some time preparing this data, and remember, if you want to try this out on your own, go into the practice files and open up Customer Data-4A, and you can follow along. But I'm now ready to apply my table style. Now, the first thing I need to do is click anywhere within my data, because if I'm clicked over here in column M, that's a blank cell. There's nothing in it, and I can't really apply a table style to that. I want to do it to the current data. So I'm going to click inside of my data set, and then I'm going to come up to my Home ribbon tab. These are a pretty popular tool, and that's why they are located right smack dab in the middle of the Home ribbon. You'll see that if you come over directly to the right of conditional formatting, we have the Format as Table button. Now, when you click on this button, you get a huge pop down of all these little colored squares. These actually represent examples of the formatting that will be applied to your table. I'm going to go ahead and just pick one of them. You can always pick a different table style if you don't like the look later on, but you click on the particular format you want to apply. Then you're going to see this Create Table box pop up. Now, one thing to notice is that it actually shows you the range of your table. This is why having blank rows can be a no-no, because Excel can't actually select the correct range. If you do have blank rows, you're more than welcome to just highlight the correct range by left dragging over that range with your mouse. But again, depending on the size of your data, that could be quite big, so you could also type it in. The dollar signs just represent that it is an absolute reference. Now, my table has headers. What's up with that? That means that you do have column headers at the top of your table. And this is also important because it helps make the table style really easy to be created. So I'm going to click on OK, and boom, when I click inside of one of my cells, I now have my table style. Now let's take just a moment and point out a couple of the great features that you get as soon as you apply the table style. One of them is you get this alternating row color. This is great when you're trying to read down, again, a list of data. And this is where the formatting of the table style comes into play. Additionally, at the top, you've got these little silver arrows. If you click on these are built-in auto sorting and filtering for your Microsoft Excel table. The other great thing about table styles is they're really easy to turn off, but we'll talk about that one in just a few minutes. So remember, try this out on your own by going to the practice files. Hey everyone, I'm ready to take a table style that I've applied to my data in Microsoft Excel and actually start using some of the built-in tools that are part of the table style experience. So as always, if you want to follow along on your own and try this out, go to the practice files folder and open up Customer Data-5A. Now inside my data, inside my table style, I've got these great auto and sorting filtering arrows at the top of each of my columns. I want to start by using these and show you a few of the great tricks that are inside of them. Now, first of all, there's built-in sorting. So when I come to any of the columns, I'm going to go to my bookings column in this case and click right on the arrow. You're going to see that I have at the very top an ascending sort or a descending sort. I'm going to go ahead and do a descending sort, and you'll notice that this again takes all of the information, sorts it by row, but based on, again, that particular column. Notice the little arrow, how it points down to indicate that there's a down sort going on. If I come to another column, for example, the destination column, and do a sort on this one, you'll notice that Now it's going to sort by that column and the previous sort gets cleared out. So what do you do if you need to sort by more than one column at a time? This is sometimes called a multi-phase sort. For this, I'm actually going to click inside my table style, but I'm going to go up to the data ribbon tab and actually use the sort and filter group. This is great when you need to do two sorts, two levels of sorts, I should say. I'm going to come to the sort group. And again, it's great because it recognizes that I have a table style. So I can come in and you'll notice it continues to show the first sort that I had turned on. But now I'm going to add a second level where when there's a tie in destination, I'd also like it to sort based on the bookings. And I can decide if I want that sort to be from smallest to largest or from largest to smallest. So let's see if that works. I'm going to click on OK. So what I'm going to see here is when there's a tie in the destination, when I come over to bookings, it's going to sort those rows again in ascending order. And I can see that as I come down, for example, I see Duluth here. And when I look at the bookings, I can see that they are sorted also in ascending order. And again, notice the two different arrows that you have next to each one representing the type of sort that's been done. Now let's go ahead and take a peek at filtering. Filtering is a little bit different, right? Because we are just focusing on specific types of data inside of our table style. For this one, I want to come into destinations again and click on the arrow. You'll notice here at the bottom that I have a list of all my destinations. If I uncheck them and then I come in and just check off the ones I want to see, you'll notice that it's going to, again, just show me the data points that meet the criteria I set, which in this case is all my destinations that start with the letter B. Notice next to the auto sorting and filtering arrow, a little funnel representing that particular type of filter that I've applied. To turn the filter off, I can click here on the little filtering arrow and come in and say clear filter from. There's also some clearing options up in the data ribbon in the sort and filter group. Now, what if I would like to look for any locations or destinations in this point that start with the letter M? Rather than coming in and actually clicking on all the different arrows, I'm going to come up to the search box and actually type in M with what we call a wildcard, which is an asterisk. This goes through the list of my destinations and finds any of them that start with the letter M. Notice here how it's already selected them for me and is showing them to me. When I click on OK, now it shows me just the destinations that fit that wildcard criteria. So there's a lot of tricks like this that can really help you to optimize the sorting and filtering inside of your table style. Remember to turn the filtering off. I'm going to go back to the little auto sorting and filtering arrow and just click on clear filter from. Now I'm back to my full list. Welcome back, everybody. I want to be able to show you a great tool inside of a Microsoft Excel table that allows you to take filtering and actually apply some of your own custom criteria to it. It's called a custom AutoFilter. So what we're going to do for this is I'm going to start by coming in and just sorting my destinations in ascending order. But we're going to go ahead and just update it really fast. What I want you to see is in my data, I actually have the city of Fargo, but it's been designated by different like east, west, north, south. And when I do my filter, I want to make sure that all the Fargos come back. Now for this, I'm going to come up to the destinations auto sorting and filtering arrow and come down. Directly above where I can search for a specific field to filter for, I have this thing called text filters. These are super cool. What Excel does is it recognizes that the data type in this column of my table is text. And then based on that, if you look over here on the right, it gives me different kinds of criteria that I can filter for based on the types of data. So because it's text, you'll notice that I have everything from equals to does not equal. It begins with, that's very text centric, isn't it? Or even contains. So in this case, I'm going to say any field in this column that contains the word Fargo. It's not case sensitive in this case. It's just based on, again, the text. I'm going to click on OK. And based on that, it returns all of my locations that have the word Fargo inside of them. This is a filter. So notice the light blue highlight over here on the left to represent my rows that are filtered. Now to turn that filter off, I'm actually going to come up to the data ribbon tab this time. and go to the Sort and Filter group. And there's a clear option. You'll notice the funnel with the red X on it. That will clear any filters in my table. Now, what if I do a filter on a column that is not text-based? Maybe that's a number. For that, I'm going to come to my Amount of Sales column. I'm going to click on the Auto Sorting and Filtering arrow and come in. And in the same location, but this time it's not text, it's looking for number filters. So you'll see here as I come down that Excel updates the type of filter it will do for me based on the type of data in the column. So since this has a column of numbers, that's the type of filters I get. So I'm going to come in this time and I'm going to pick that I would like to filter for anything that is greater than or equal to 1,500. I'm not going to include dollar signs or decimals because all of my values don't have decimals in them. I'm going to click on OK. And we'll see here that I'm only seeing, again, those value points that are 1,500 or above in this case. Now to turn that off, I can now go back to, again, the Auto Sorting and Filtering arrow and say Clear Filter from Amount of Sales, and it turns it off. That's another great tool that's part of a table style in Excel. Now, as always, if you want to try this out, go to the practice files and open up Customer Data-6A, and you can try applying some custom auto filters on your own. Hey everybody, welcome back to our Intro to Excel Data Analytics. We want to take a table style and update its formatting and also see a few of the options that we can change within the table style. So here I have, again, my customer data file open. Remember in the practice files folder, if you go in and open up customer data-7A, you can try this out. When you apply a table style, you're going to get a new contextual ribbon. Up in the ribbons, it's going to be on the right-hand side of any existing ribbons in Excel, and it's called Table Design. You'll only see this ribbon when you're clicked inside your table, so if you click in a normal cell outside the table, it will turn off. Now with this ribbon, I can use some of the options to help adjust the format of my table style. For example, you're going to see on the right a table style options group on this ribbon, and it's checkboxes. So for example, I can come in and I can uncheck header row. Notice that my row 1 that have my column headers in it turns off. If I check it again, they come back. It's just a way to minimize how much distraction there is in the table. You also have this alternating row color, which I'm a big fan of because it helps your eyes horizontally read data down. But notice if I uncheck banded rows, it turns off. I also have an option to do banded columns, which is again for someone that's reading from right to left or left to right. Then you also have the first column. It puts everything in the first column of your table under the header row in bold. You also have a last column that does the same thing. And then in addition, we have this filter button. You'll notice here that allows us to turn off the auto sorting and filtering arrows at the top of each of our columns. Now this total row we're going to talk about in a minute, but I want you to also see that with table styles, when you come over here, the same group of options that we used when we first applied the table style are here. So if you don't like the format of the first table that you applied, you can come in and select a different style and it will turn it on in your table. And notice that this is something where I can live preview by just hovering over the different table formats, and it will apply that particular format to my table. I don't even need to click. I'm going to want to click once I find a style that I like that I want to apply, because when I click, then it applies that format to my table. So again, lots of great options to update the look of the table style so that it's easier for you to work with the data inside of it. Hey everybody, welcome back. I want to be able to have some formulas in my table that I've created in Microsoft Excel. And the problem you have with adding formulas is that every time you add new data to your table, especially if it's a spreadsheet that's going to continue to be used and new data will be put into it, those formulas have to get adjusted. So instead, Microsoft has created a tool called a total row, which is a way to automatically turn formulas on at the bottom of your table and turn them off when you don't need it. Now, first of all, notice that if I come to the bottom of my table, it's not very long. There's only about 57 rows, and there's nothing at the bottom. But I'd like to have some formulas, for example, that could, for example, tell me how many bookings I have, do a count of bookings. Also, I have an amount of sales column that I would like to see a total for. And then right here, I also have, for example, even commissions. I'd like a count on that. So I could manually put those formulas in, but instead, if there's something faster like the total row, I'd like to use that. The first step is for me to click in my table so that the tools that are available to me to use with the table will be available to me on that ribbon. Then I'm going to come up to the table style options box. And I'm going to check off total row. It's just a small checkbox. Now the bottom row under my table data, notice row 58 here, has a new piece of information in it that says total. And then the very last cell of that row already has what looks like a formula of some sort in it. So if I click on that, I'm going to see a small arrow appear next to the total that I'm seeing there. I'm not quite sure what it is, but if I click on it, it shows me that Excel is already thinking that I'd like to do a count of the commission paid column. And that is exactly what I intended. So it kind of read my mind, though it didn't. Now, right here in my amount of sales column, I'd like to see an average. So if I click right there, I can come in and I will see, again, a certain list of formulas, including average, count, min, max, and there are a few more. It's not all the formulas, but a good number. And I'm going to pick average. So this would be the average of my amount of sales. And then for my bookings column, I'm going to come in and just do good old sum. So I can see a sum of all my bookings. Now, over time, if new rows of data get put into my table, it's very easy for me to uncheck the total row, turn it off, and then the next time I need it, I just recheck it and it turns back on. So it's a great tool to use when you need and then turn it off when you don't need it. Now, as always, we'd love to have you try this out. So go to the practice files, open up customer data-8A, and you can try using the total row yourself. Hi, everybody. Welcome back. I want to take a Microsoft Excel table and actually add new data to it. This is common because your tables often are what we call live spreadsheets, meaning they're continually being updated with new data. So how do I do that? Well, first of all, if I come to the very bottom of my table, one of the options is just to add new rows. But the important thing is to make sure that the new rows are part of the existing table style format. And you'll see if I come right here to the very last cell of my table, that if I hit the tab button, it will automatically add a new row for me. In addition to that, I can also come right here to the bottom right-hand corner, rest my mouse pointer on the very bottom right-hand corner, and you'll see that I get a little double-headed arrow, one that points up and an arrow that points down. If I drag this as I hold down my left mouse button, it will add more new rows to the bottom of my table for me to add new data to. In addition to that, I can also right-click on a row inside of my table, and notice if I say insert, it will insert a new blank row with the same formatting as the surrounding rows and columns of my table. For a new column, I can right-click on one of the columns of the table and say insert, and again, I get the same thing. So the important thing is that I'm inserting these new columns and rows, and they have the same format as the existing table does. Now, if I delete them out, again, I want to make sure that as I delete, I'm not deleting anything that has data in it. Otherwise, I will lose data within my table, same as normal cells. Now, the final thing we want to focus on is how do I turn a table style off without losing my data? And this can happen sometimes. Maybe you don't want the table style anymore, but you would like the data. For that, you're going to click inside your table, go back up to that contextual ribbon, Table Design, come over to the left-hand side to the Tools group and select Convert to Range. Now, what this means is turn this back into normal Excel cells without the table style applied. That's what an Excel range would be. It's just a normal set of cells. So when I click on this button, it says, okay, you want to convert your table to a normal range. I'm going to say yes. And you'll see that the format does not turn off. So the alternating rows, the column header, all the formatting stays. But if I look up there for that, again, contextual ribbon, it's not there anymore. To get rid of the formatting, then I'd need to go in and actually turn off the table formatting that's been turned on. So these are now just normal cells, and I can move forward. Thanks so much. Join us in the practice files folder by going in and opening up customer data-9A, and you can try this out on your own. Hi, everybody. Welcome back. I want to be able to apply what we call a conditional format to the data in this table. Now, this is just a normal Excel spreadsheet. There's no table styles applied, but the benefit of a conditional format is it's like frosting on top of my cells. It allows me to update formatting according to criteria that I set, but it doesn't actually change what's in the cells. It just changes the way they look, and that's why I call it frosting. It's like the frosting on top of the cupcake. Now, I want to start with my bookings column. First thing I want to do is actually select all the cells in the bookings column without selecting the heading. But to do that, I'm just going to do Control-Shift and the drop-down arrow, and it selects all the data down to the very last cell, but doesn't include cell B1. To apply the conditional format, I'm going to come up to my Home ribbon tab, come over here to the middle, to almost exactly the middle of the ribbon, and you're going to see a conditional formatting drop-down option. And it gives me different types of conditional formats. We're going to start with one of the most basic ones, which is highlight cell rules. Now, in my case, I want to make cells pop out to me that have any bookings over 5. So I'm going to come right here and pick greater than. And you'll notice that I'm going to come in and say, okay, anytime there is, again, a booking that's over 5, I want to have the format change. Now, in this case, it's turning it red, but there are other built-in formats I can pick from. I'm going to go for the green and then click on OK. And what we're going to see is that any cells in the bookings column that have, again, bookings over 5 do turn green. Now, if I go to one of those cells and say change the bookings to 4, we're going to see that the conditional format toggles off. Now, can we layer conditional formats? Absolutely. I'm going to click again, select that same group of cells, and then I'm going to come back up to the conditional formatting. And this time I want to come in and have anything that is less than 3 do the red. So now I'll see that any bookings that are under 3 turn red. Now say one of these were to go up to an 8. Then we would see the other conditional format toggle on. So you can layer these on top of each other, really just like layers of frosting on a cake. Again, the cake analogy. Now, another type is a conditional format that will do things like a little symbol next to the cells. So now I'm going to move over to my amount of sales column and again, do that same selection. I'm going to come up to the conditional formatting menu and come in and select this time icon sets. This will put a little symbol next to the cells depending on the values. Now, in this case, Microsoft Excel helps to decide what those values are. So after I apply the conditional format, I'm going to go back up to conditional formatting, down to manage rules, and I'm going to come in and I can see the rule that's been applied. To edit it, I'm going to double click on it, and I'll see right here that it's based on a %. Now, I can update this. So for example, rather than being at 67%, maybe it's 75, and then it's going to be 25%. This is going to update when the particular conditional format changes. I can also change, for example, the symbol that it's using. Maybe we'll use red, yellow, and green lights. And you'll see that now I've applied that change, how it updates my conditional format. So conditional formats are a great way to, again, make things pop out to you without actually changing what's inside of your cells. Now, as always, we want you to try this out. So open up Conditional Format-A in the Practice Files folder and try applying some conditional formats of your own. Hey everybody, welcome back. Now I have an Excel spreadsheet that has some conditional formats applied to cells to help make things pop out. First thing I need to do is edit one of those conditional formats, and then just how do I turn them off? So first of all, to edit any of the conditional formats in your spreadsheet, you need to actually select the cells where the conditional format has been applied. So I'm going to come to my bookings column and do a Control-Shift, press down on the arrow key, or I could left drag over all the cells that I see where the conditional format's been applied to my bookings column. Then to go in and edit the conditional format, I'm going to come back up to the conditional formatting button on my home ribbon and come down to manage rules at the very bottom of the menu. Now, after I do this, I'm going to see any current conditional formats that are applied to the cells that I have selected. The one that I'd like to edit is this one right here where the cell values turn green for any bookings that are over 5. I'm going to double click on that, You'll notice right here that it comes in, it shows me what the current conditional format is. I'm going to update this so it will change based on if the values are greater than 8, and I actually want it to be greater than or equal to. So notice how I can change both the condition and, again, the actual value that it's being pinged upon right here. When I click on OK, it's going to update my conditional format, and then I'll see that it will change just a little bit. So now I will only see that conditional format pop on for any bookings that are 8 or more. Now, what if I decide I just don't need conditional formats anywhere in my sheet or on specific cells? For that, I'm going to go back to the conditional formatting button one more time, come down to clear rules. Now, it's really important you pick the right option here because your options are clear rules from just selected cells or the entire sheet. If I do the entire sheet, it clears them off of the entire spreadsheet, as you can see here. But again, nothing inside my cell is impacted. It's just the frosting on top. And that's what makes conditional formats so important and effective. They allow you to really change the way a spreadsheet looks without infringing on anything inside of your cells. Now, as always, we'd love to have you try this out. So go into the practice files folder, open up conditional format-2A, and try applying some conditional formats, editing them, and also turning them off. Hey everybody, welcome back. I am ready to look at a very popular category of functions inside of Excel called an if function. There are also fellow functions that we're going to explore, but basically they are all part of a category of functions called logical functions. Now, the if function allows you to make logical comparisons between a value and what you expect. Your function will actually have a true and a false answer within it. So let's look at the example that I have ready for us to play with. Right here, I have a time card for the Breezy Shores Travel Agency. And basically, if an employee makes more than $500 or $500, they need to pay 10% in federal income tax. Now, please do not use this to calculate your own taxes. This is a very generic example. But if they make less than $500, they don't need to pay any income tax at all. So I need the income tax to be calculated, but only if they're, again, hitting that $500 threshold. This is a great example of where you could use an if function. So I'm going to come right down here to where I have column 17 for their federal income tax and figure out if my employees for Breezy Shores need to pay income tax or not. Now, built into Excel, there's a great tool when you're up against a new function called the Insert Function button. To access it, I'm going to come up to my, again, formula bar and go directly to the left to this little FX button. This is a great doorway to the Insert Function box. I love this because it allows you to look through all of Microsoft Excel's built-in functions, and then it helps you to step through creating a function that you are not familiar with. Now, a couple of ways to find functions. Here at the top, I could type in the name of the function I'm looking for and say go, and it would find it for me in the list below. Or I can also look for it by category. Remember, I told you that the if function is part of the logical category of function in Excel. This will take me and limit me to just the functions that are part of that particular category. And again, I'm seeing that the if function is just represented with the word if, so I'm going to click on it. Now, with the function arguments box, the next step is for me to type in the different pieces of my formula. Notice below that for every row that I click on, it actually will describe it for me below. So the first thing I need to do is start with my logical test. Now, my logical test is, has my employee made $500 or more? So I'm going to come in and click on their gross pay, and then I'm going to come in and actually say, have they made greater than or equal to, and notice I have to type this in, 500. I'm not going to include dollars and cents because in my spreadsheet, it's all whole numbers. Even though there's decimals, it's okay because Excel will take care of that for me. Now, if that's true, then I'm going to come down and say, well, if that's true, then take their gross pay, and I'm going to multiply it by 10%. Now here I can either use decimals or I can just use percents because the function arguments box will put it into a decimal for me. Now if that's false, if they don't make more than 500, I don't want it to do anything because they won't owe taxes. So I'm going to put in a 0. Now, if everything's calculating correctly, right here in the bottom left-hand corner, it's going to show me what my potential answer for my formula is going to be. So I'm going to click on OK and look down in the cell. And based on the fact that my employee has, again, made greater than 500 or equal to it, it's again timesing it by 10 and it's putting in their federal income tax. Now, if I look up here at the formula bar, I can see the formula that it's created. I can also double click and see that same formula. So equal sign if, and then my logical test is B14 greater than or equal to 500. Now, if that's true, then I'm going to come to the second part of the formula, which is take B14 and multiply it by 10%, which is what it's done. If that's false, then I come to the second comma and just put in a 0. They won't be charged any income tax. Now, can I copy this formula over? Absolutely. So I'm going to click on it, come to the bottom right-hand corner, drag it to the right, and we'll see again that for each of my employees where they've made greater than or equal to 500, it's going to take what they are making and multiply it by 10%, and that will figure out their federal income tax. If they make under, then we'll see here that it doesn't charge them any federal income tax. So again, if functions are super cool because they allow your formulas to make a choice based on those comparisons that you put into the formula. So we're going to explore these. As always, if you want to try this out, go up to the practice files, open up time card if function-A, and try creating your own if function. Welcome back, everybody. We want to explore a very popular function in Excel called the SUMIF function. Now, it is part of the family of functions along with the if function, but SUMIF will sum values in a range that meet criteria that you specify. So let's look at an example. In my spreadsheet here, you're going to see that I have destinations, and I have sorted my destinations column. But over here, I also have a total of the amount of money spent on tickets for each of those destinations. In my situation, I need to know the sum of the tickets for the destination of Cancun, but I only need it summed if it is to Cancun. If I do a normal sum function, it's going to sum everything in my totals column. So how do I create a sum function that only sums based on specific criteria? In enters the SUMIF function. So let's check this out. I'm going to come to the bottom of the total row of my spreadsheet, and I can do that just by doing Control-End and moving over one cell. This is where I want my answer to go. And as with all functions, we start where the answer will be. Then I'm going to come up and use the insert function box. If you remember, this is a great way, and it's directly left of the formula bar, to access functions that you're not familiar with the syntax for. Now I'm going to do a search. I know the name of the function is SUMIF, no space between the sum and the if, and it takes me directly to it. Make sure you select SUMIF and not SUMIFS, okay? Now when I come in, again, the function arguments box is going to help step me through the different pieces of the formula. The first thing is my range. Now notice this is the range of the cells that you want evaluated. Now you have to pause here for a moment because the range of the cells that I want evaluated is actually all the content in column E, or my destination column, because that's the criteria. So what I want to do is select this range. A great way to do that is to click in the first cell under the heading cell in the column and then do Control-Shift drop-down arrow. You'll notice that this will actually select all of the other cells down in the column that have data inside of them. Now I want to come to my criteria row. This is what creates the criteria of only summing where the destination is set to Cancun. So what I need to do here is set my criteria. I'm going to say it has to equal Cancun. I need to spell Cancun correctly. I'm not going to worry about its case sensitivity. It just needs to be spelled correctly. Then I now need to come in and put in my sum range. This is actually going to be all the cells under my header row for column H. So I'm going to go ahead and click in the first cell and again, either drag down or do Control-Shift down arrow to select that group of cells. Then I'm going to go ahead and click on OK. Now what I'm going to see right here is it's telling me that the answer for all the destinations that have Cancun, the sum is $2,952. How can I check that? Well, it's pretty easy because I actually pre-sorted the destination column, and I can see here that all the Cancuns are together. So if I come over here and I actually highlight them with my mouse, like I've just done here, I can see down here on my status bar, it's telling me with the auto calculate that the sum would be 2952. And if I come down to my answer at the bottom, sorry, we have to go clear down here, that it's also 2952. And if we look at the formula, we can see here that it's summing if the amount in E2 through E200 is equal to Cancun. And then it's going to sum the range of anything in H2 through H200 that's on the same row. Kind of similar to a VLOOKUP function, but with a built-in sum. Super cool function. Please try it out. Go to the practice files folder, open up SUMIF destinations-A, and you can try to put your own SUMIF into it. Hey, welcome back, everybody. We're ready to try a COUNTIF function. Now, COUNTIF functions are, again, a statistical function that count the number of cells that meet a criteria. So in our example, I have a spreadsheet, again, that's based on the sales of a travel agency at their different offices. You'll notice here that column D is the offices where the different trips were sold, and then column E is the destinations. This time I'm really focused though on where the different destinations were sold, which is the office location. I want to sort by that particular column. So I'm going to click in it, and then on my home ribbon tab of Excel, I'm going to come over to the editing group and go right here to the sort and filter button. This is a great fast way to do an ascending sort, and clicking on the A to Z button, just so that I can sort all my offices together. Now I want to do a count whenever it's the Blaine office. That's my focus. So over here, I have it set up already. I'm going to click in cell L1, and I'm going to add a COUNTIF function. Now to do this, I'm a big fan of the insert function button. So on the left-hand side of my formula bar, I'm just going to come in. I'm going to click on the FX button. And this again helps me step through a function that I may not be familiar with. At the top, I'm going to type in the name of the function, which is COUNTIF, no space between them, and click on the Go button at the right. This will again take me to any functions that have that syntax in them, and I can select the specific function and click on OK. And in this case, it's COUNTIF. Now, COUNTIF functions are fairly simple. You only have a range and a criteria. Now, first of all, my range is my office column. So I'm going to click on the very first item, and I can either left drag to select, or I can use Control-Shift drop-down arrow on my keyboard to select that range for me. And we'll see that it puts it in. My second item in the function arguments box is the criteria. This is going to be the condition in the form of a number, expression, or text that defines which cells you want counted. Now in my case, it's that it's the Blaine office. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to come in and just in quotes type in the word Blaine. I do need to make sure I spell it correctly. Because it's text and not a value or number, I have to put it in quotes. And then I'm going to click on OK. Let's scroll up and look at our, again, formula. Let me zoom in on it just a little bit. You can see here it tells me that it's 6. Now, if I come to my destinations or my office column, and I actually left drag over the Blaine offices and come down to my formula auto calculate down here, notice it's telling me it's 6. And if we look at the formula up here in the formula bar, I can again see that it's = COUNTIF. Then again, the range that I need to have counted, and then the criteria, which it has to be from the Blaine office. Now let's say I update that. Maybe instead of having it be the Blaine office I need to do a count of, maybe it's going to be the Brainerd. Again, making sure I spell it correctly. I'm going to click back in cell L1, and this time I'm going to come to my formula bar, and I'm just going to update the criteria portion of the formula to be the different office. Notice how I'm making sure I spell it correctly, and then I'm going to click on Enter. Now I'm getting a count of 7. And again, if I go down and highlight those particular offices and look at my auto calculate down on my status bar, it's telling me 7. So it's a great way to simply count based on specific criteria. Please try it out. Go into the practice files, open up COUNTIF destinations-A, and try adding your own COUNTIF function to the spreadsheet. Welcome back, everybody. We are ready to try an AVERAGEIF function. Now, first of all, the AVERAGEIF function returns the average of cells in a range that meet criteria that you provide. Now, here's our situation. Again, I'm looking at a spreadsheet of different destinations sold by different offices. This time, my focus is that I need to know the average of the total sales for Boston. That's a specific destination. And this is a great use case for an AVERAGEIF function. So up at the top, I'm going to click in cell L1 and put my AVERAGEIF function in that cell. To get support, I am going to use the insert function button. So directly to the left of the formula ribbon, I'm going to come in and click on the FX button. The other pre-step that I've taken is I've actually sorted column E just to make it easier to see all the Boston sales grouped together in the spreadsheet. After I click on the FX button, I'm going to go in and actually do a search for the AVERAGEIF function. There's no space between average and if. Once you find it, go ahead and double click on it and it will pop open the function arguments for the AVERAGEIF function. First thing we need is a range. This is going to be the cells that again are creating my need for the average. And this actually happens to be the destination column because that's where I established that Boston is the destination that I need to average the total for. So I'm going to click in the first cell under my destination heading. Then on my keyboard, I'm going to hold down Shift, Control, and pointing down arrow to select all those cells. I could also just left drag over them. Now for my criteria is that the destination is Boston. So what I need to do is in quotes, actually put in =, Boston. Boston doesn't have to be uppercase or lowercase. The reason I'm including it in quotes is because Boston is text. My third thing is what I'm averaging. Now for me, it's actually going to be column H, the total. So I'm going to click in the first cell under the total header row and again use that Control Shift down arrow to select all the cells. And then I'm going to go ahead and click on OK. Now, if I come up, I can see here that I do have an answer. But how do I check to see if that's really correct? Well, remember, if you go down to the status bar of Excel, if you right click on it, you can turn on auto calculations for things like sum, average, and count. All you do is left click by the particular one that you want and it will add a check mark or take a check mark away. I have average turned on. So in my spreadsheet, I'm going to come in and select all the totals for Boston. And it's pretty easy because I can see Boston directly to the left, right? I just want to make sure that I get just the right one selected and don't go down too far. Then I'm going to come in and look at the average it's telling me here and look at the average up above. Now, the reason it's 1 over is because it's rounding in my average down below because there are no decimal places showing down here. But this is letting me see that my formula is correct. To double check the formula, let's open it up. So here I'm seeing again, average if, my range is again that destination column. If it equals Boston, then average cells H2 through H201, which is my total row, and that's exactly what it's done. Now we'd love to have you try this out. So go to the practice files, open up average if destinations -A, and try adding your own average if function to the spreadsheet. Hey everybody, we're ready to take some time and explore how you can create charts inside of Microsoft Excel. Now, why are charts so critical? Because they allow us to quickly take a list of values and information and actually digest it and make sense of it. If I hand someone a list of values, it's going to take them a really long time to understand it. But if I hand them a chart within a matter of seconds, they can quickly understand that data in different ways. Charts can also help to tell a story focused on specific points in your data. So the great thing about Excel is it makes it really easy to create a chart. Now, right here, I have a spreadsheet about the Breezy Wins expenses for the first 6 months of a year. And we'll see here that there is a total row in row 8 that has, again, some sum functions in it. No big deal. I would like to chart my expenses. So the first thing we want to talk about is how do you decide what to chart? Well, we don't want to include the expenses in row 8 in what we're charting because we are really focusing on the expenses themselves, not their totals. So to start, we need to select the cells that we want represented in our chart. Now, I am going to select cell A3 because I have to get the other cells selected. So it's okay if you have this one point in the top left-hand corner that is empty because, again, it's not going to actually be one of your rows. It's just part of the selection. I'm not going to include row 8 because including totals would mess up what I'm charting. To create my chart, I'm going to go up to the Insert Ribbon tab. Now, Microsoft has a great tool here, if you move to the middle under the Charts group, called Recommended Charts. If you don't know how to create a chart or what chart would work well with your data, Recommended Charts is a great kind of pre-step because what Microsoft does is they recommend potential charts that would represent your data. So here on the left, I'm actually seeing their recommended charts. And I can click on each one and see them actually in the middle of the recommended charts box. And I can scroll down until I really find one that I think best represents my chart data. I'm going to go ahead and go with this very top one, the clustered column chart at the top, and click on OK. And it automatically puts my chart on the same sheet as my, again, data. This is called an embedded chart. Now, if I would like to go a different route and actually make my chart myself, I'm going to click back away from the chart and the chart data and reselect the same cells. This time I'm going to go up to the Insert Ribbon tab and come into the Charts group. And I'm not going to click on Recommended Charts, but instead I'm going to select a chart of my choice. You're going to see that there are different charts here, and when I click on them, there are subcharts underneath. Some of these are going to be 2D charts, and some of them are going to be 3D charts. What I want to do is pick one by hovering over the type that I think works with my data the best, and then I'm going to click. Now I'm going to get another embedded chart. This chart might go over the top of my first chart. So charts are like graphics. You can actually left drag them and drop them so they're not over the top of your chart data. Also, it's not uncommon to have multiple charts on one sheet in your spreadsheet. I'm going to go ahead and adjust the size of my charts by coming to the corners of them. This will allow me to click on the sizing handles and size them just like a graphic or a text box. And here you can see, if I look at one of these charts, how quickly it allows me to analyze the data that's inside my chart. And notice that charts can be clicked on, and you'll see sizing circles on the middles of their borders and also their corners that allow you to size them. This is how you also know that your chart is actually selected and focused on. And always remember to kiss your charts. Keep it simple, stupid. Really complicated charts may not really represent your data in great ways. Keeping it simple can help make charts that are powerful and tell the story you want told in fast ways. Now, if you want to try this out, make some charts on your own, go to the Practice Files folder, open up Chart 1-A, and make some charts of your own. Hey everybody, welcome back. Now that I've created some charts in Excel, I'd like to be able to format my charts and also edit their content. So first thing you'll see here in my Chart 2 file, and remember, if you go to the Practice Files folder and open up Chart 2-A, you can try this out as well. I have one extra chart that maybe I don't need, so I need to delete that chart. I'm going to come right here and click on the chart I'd like to delete and hit the delete key on my keyboard. This deletes my chart, but notice none of my chart data gets deleted. The other thing I'd like to do is take my chart and make it bigger, the existing one that's here. So I'm going to click on it, get the sizing circles, go to the corner and just size it out a little bit to make it bigger. Now, first of all, how do I edit or reformat my chart? For that, I'm actually going to come up to the top right-hand corner of my chart, and I'm going to see 3 buttons. The first one is the Chart Elements button. This allows me to select specific areas of my chart and actually turn them on. For example, I can come in and add data labels. This will show me the amounts of each of the different data points in my chart. Or I can add a data table under my chart to actually show the data that's being edited. Or for example, grid lines. Right now I have horizontal grid lines in my chart, but if I want to add some vertical ones, I can come in and say primary, in this case, vertical grid lines, and it adds those for me. I can also come into the legend area, and maybe I'd like my legend at the top. So the Chart Elements button allows me to turn on different chart elements, turn them off, and also place them in different locations. The second button down is all about formatting. This is the Paintbrush button. It has 2 tabs. The Style button keeps the same chart type, but allows me to come in and try out different chart styles. And you'll notice there's several different options to pick from, and all you have to do to test drive it is to hover. So this is a great way to update the look of your chart without changing its type. When it comes to color, the second tab at the top allows you to go in and change the color scheme of your chart. So you can try something that's along a blue or even a reddish tint. So you can go through and try different, again, color palettes without actually having to go up into the ribbons. The third one is all about filtering. This allows you to take your chart. You'll see all the elements on both the X and Y axes. You can come in unchecked, select all, just check off the elements that you want to have filtered in your chart. Come to the Apply button in the bottom left-hand corner, and after you click on Apply, it will update your changes and just show you those elements that you have selected. To undo the filter, just come back up and recheck Select All and say Apply, and it will change your chart back. Now, all these options are also available up in the contextual ribbons. Notice that when you click on your chart, you have 2 new ribbons that come up at the top, one called Chart Design and Format. Chart Design is my personal favorite because it takes everything we just did and puts it right here on the ribbon for you so that I can, again, update chart styles, even update my colors. Now, when it comes to changing your chart type, this allows you, for example, to go from a column chart to a line chart. You have many choices. I'm going to come to Change Chart Type on the right-hand side of the Chart Design Contextual ribbon. And I can pick different chart types here by selecting a new type on the left, a subtype in the middle, And then once I click on OK, it's going to update my chart type to that new choice. Final thing, so far my charts have all been on the same sheet as my chart data. If I'd like to move them, I can actually come to my chart, right click on it, and again, I'm going to get a menu to help me edit my chart. One of the options is Move Chart. It's also available up on the Chart Design ribbon. This is going to allow me to take my chart and actually move it so that it's on its own sheet. By default, it calls these sheets Chart 1, but you can always give them a different name. The benefit of this is that it keeps its chart separate from the data. The data is still going to update to the chart. So for example, if I come in and update some of the information that my chart's based on, like for example, the wages that are being paid out, when I make these changes in my chart data, if I go to the sheet that the chart is based on, you're going to see that it will refresh. Your charts always refresh to their data. So again, we'd love you to try this out. Go into the practice files folder, open up chart 2A and try editing some of the charts in it. Welcome back, everybody. We are ready to look at a type of chart that's a little bit different. It's a tiny chart in a worksheet cell that provides you with a visual representation of data that's either horizontally next to it or vertically above it. You can use Sparklines to show trends in a series of values like seasonal increases or decreases, economic cycles. They are not as popular as normal charts, but they're super cute. So let's check one out. So right here, you'll see that I have a row of data about trends for sales within this organization. And I'd like to get a little in chart or in cell chart to represent the trend over the months of the year that I have here. Or in this case, it's broken down, it looks like by quarters. So I've clicked in cell F4 under the year to date overview cell, and I'd like to create my sparkline right there. I'm going to come up to the insert ribbon tab and actually come over to the right hand middle, and I'll see that there are three different types of, again, sparklines that I can create: line, column, and win-loss. I want to start with a line. So I'm going to click, it opens up the create sparkline box. Notice it already knows that the location of the chart will be cell F4. That's where I was clicked, but now it needs to know the range of cells that it's going to chart. So I'm going to come in and highlight the cells that I want it to chart, and then I'm going to click on OK. And voila, let me zoom in a little bit. You'll see that inside my cell, I see a small chart. Now, if I would like to edit this chart, I can click in the cell where the chart is located, come up to my ribbons, and I'll see that I have a new contextual ribbon. So when you click on a sparkline, you'll see this sparkline ribbon appear. When I click on it, it gives me tools to update the style of the sparkline. This will basically change its color. I can also come in and change its type. Now, there are only three types. Line and column work best with most kinds of data. Win-loss is good at showing highs and lows or negatives and positives. So I'm going to change this to a column sparkline. And notice that from here, I can actually highlight the high point and the low point in the data to be different colors. I can also come in and actually select my own sparkline color, and I can also pick the marker color. Maybe I want my high point to be in red. So I can customize. And when I'm done, I can click away and I can see my updated sparkline. Now, one more thing, when you want to delete a sparkline, you can't just click on the cell and hit delete like you would to take data out of a cell. To delete a sparkline, you either have to right click on it and actually come in and clear the contents of the cell, but you'll notice that still won't do it. So if you do want to take it out, what you're going to do is go up to the sparkline ribbon, come to the far right hand side to the clear button, and notice that I can select clear selected sparklines, and that will take the sparkline out. Now, as always, we want you to try this out. So go into the practice files folder, open up Sparklines 1A, and you can try adding your own sparkline to that cell data. Hey everybody, welcome back. I want to create a sparkline that's good at showing positive and negatives or highs and lows. So in my spreadsheet here in row 7, you'll see that I have some dates and then I have some trends of percentages that occurred over a certain number of days. And I'd like to create an in-cell chart called a sparkline to show this trend. Because it has positives and negatives in it, the sparkline win-loss chart type would be the best to use. So I'm going to come in and click in the cell where I want my win-loss chart to go. I'm going to go up to the insert ribbon and I'm going to come over to the sparklines group. This time I'm going to pick the win-loss sparkline chart type. There's only 3, and this is the one made to show highs, lows, negatives, positives. You guys get what I'm talking about. Now, first of all, notice that it's going to put my sparkline in the cell where I was clicked, cell F8, but I still need to provide a data range. So I'm going to select the cells that I want to have, again, highlighted in my chart, and then I'm going to click on OK. And again, this is made to show a positive and a negative. Now, when I click in the cell where my sparkline is located, I get that sparkline contextual ribbon, or I can update the style of my sparkline chart. I can also edit, for example, to have highs and lows formatted, or I can even change it, for example, to a different chart type. But again, this one is made to highlight the highs and the positives and negatives of the chart, right? And I can see how I can also go in and pick a specific marker color for different points within the chart. And now I see my high-low sparkline. Remember to get rid of a sparkline, click in the cell and go up to the clear button located on the sparklines ribbon. That will take it out. And as always, we want you to try this. So go to the Sparklines 2A file in the practice files folder and try adding your own win-loss sparkline chart into your spreadsheet. Hey everybody, welcome back. We are ready to explore one of my favorite features in Microsoft Excel, pivot tables. Pivot tables are a powerful tool to help you calculate, summarize, and analyze data that lets you see comparisons, patterns, and trends in your data. You can also create pivot table charts, but we're going to start with pivot tables. They let you work a little bit differently when you're using Excel because it's really like you're turning your Excel data into a database. They can be super fun. So first of all, let's talk about proper setup for a pivot table. Inside of Excel, you'll notice that again, I have data that's about different destinations that have been sold at different offices for the Breezy Sales Tourism Company. And we would like to pivot table this data so that we can find trends inside of it. Now, a couple of setup things to make my pivot table creation go smoothly. I've created column headers at the top. This is very helpful. And all the data underneath each column is always the same type. So all my dates are in the date column. All my offices are in the office column. Another important thing to remember is you don't want blank cells inside your data. I should say an entire blank row. Blank cells are okay, but entire blank row like this one would be a no-no because it would stop my data pivot table analysis when I get to that row. The other thing you'll notice is that my first row has a little bit different format to help set it apart as the column headers for the data underneath. Now that my setup is good, let's get ready to create our first pivot table. I'm going to click inside my pivot table data. I'm not going to click over here in column N because that's not inside the data. Then I'm going to come up to my Insert Ribbon tab. Now, pivot tables are so popular, Microsoft has created a recommended pivot tables option for anyone who's new to pivot tables. With recommended pivot tables, when you open up the box, notice how it's automatically selected all of my data. This is because I don't have any blank rows. It makes it quite convenient. In the recommended pivot tables box, what I'm going to see on the left are different pivot tables that Microsoft is recommending I could build based on my data set. You'll notice at the top, it helps to describe them based on their name. Now again, pivot tables are not about showing you all the data. They're about analyzing specific pieces of the data. For example, this one is all about the sum of the offices and where a commission was created for each or was sold. When I click on OK from the recommended pivot tables box, it actually takes me to a new sheet and has created my pivot table for me. And notice it's about analyzing, again, the sum at the different offices and also if a commission was paid, and it includes grand totals. Now, if I want to get back to my original data set, it's down on, again, its sheet. Nothing has changed in it, but notice how great the pivot table is for helping me analyze specific points of data in my data set. Now, if you want to try this out, go into the practice files folder, open up Pivot 1A, and try creating a pivot table using the recommended pivot tables button. It makes it super easy. Welcome back, everybody. I am ready to create a pivot table from scratch. So here I have my spreadsheet open, and again, notice that I've prepared it for pivot table creation by adding column headers at the top. There are no blank rows, and I'm ready to rock and roll. So I'm going to go up to my Insert Ribbon, This time, the pivot table button is the very first one at the top of the ribbon. Now, if you just click on the top half of the button, it takes you immediately into building your pivot table. If you click on the bottom half, it lets you pick where your data is coming from. Because our data is already in the spreadsheet, we're just going to click on the top half of the button. Now, with the pivot table box, it's going to ask me what the range of my pivot table data is. What's great here is because all my data is consistent, there aren't any blank rows in it, it's automatically selected all the data inside my spreadsheet. It knows where my column headers are, and the final step here is to decide where my new pivot table will go. It's going to go in a new blank worksheet, so I'm going to click on OK. Now notice down here I have a new sheet and an area that's empty but asking me for a pivot table, and on the right I have what is called the pivot table fields list. Now this is made up of 4 different areas: an area for filtering pivot table data, an area for columns, rows, and then some sort of a value from your data that you want to analyze in the middle. Remember, pivot tables are not about all your data. They're about specific data points that you want to edit. So what we want to start by doing is picking our rows. I'm going to come up here at the top and notice at the top of my pivot table fields list, I see all the rows or the column headers from my data. And I'm going to take the office field and drag it down to my rows area. As soon as I do this, notice it adds it and starts building my pivot table on the left. So you actually get to see the birth of your pivot table when you do this. The next thing we're going to do is take the dates and add those to my columns. So now we'll see my columns get added. Now my columns are automatically grouping according to date. This is something that, again, Microsoft Excel can do for you. If you add a field and don't want it, you can actually come into the pivot tables area and left drag it off, and you'll notice that it will remove it. So instead, let's go ahead and bring in the destination field. The next thing I want to do is pick some value that I'm going to calculate or do some sort of a summary function to in the middle of my pivot table. And my data includes quite a few options. I have an amount column that has value data in it, a tickets column, and also a totals column. I'm going to go ahead and pick the tickets and bring them down to my values area. Now what we're seeing here is for each office, this is where, again, the tickets were sold for a specific destination. So there are a lot of blank cells in my pivot table, and that's because there isn't always data to associate when these 2 points, the destination and the office, come together. So it's blank. But notice how it's allowing me to see when it does come together. At the bottom, I'm going to see grand totals. And then if I come to the far right, I'm also going to see a grand total as well. So pivot tables are very much about analyzing. And if I look at the values, it's automatically doing a sum for me where these 2 points of data come together. Now again, if you want to try this out, go to the practice files folder, open up Pivot 2A, and try creating a pivot table on your own from scratch. Hey everybody, welcome back. We are ready to be able to adjust the summary function in our pivot table data and also to format that data. So I've come into my pivot table and I'd like to go in and adjust, first of all, the field that's being summarized in the middle of my pivot table and then also the function that it's using. Now we'll see here that if I click on any of these values or even hover, it tells me it's doing a sum of the tickets sold. So I'm going to come in and take the value field in the bottom right-hand corner of my pivot table field list and drag it off. Because instead, I'd like to bring down the total of the tickets that have been sold. This is the total amount. And we'll see here that, again, if I hover, it's telling me that it's defaulting to do a sum function. Let's say I'd like it to do an average function instead. To adjust that, again, summary function, I'm going to come down into the pivot table fields and I'm going to click on the arrow directly next to the field that I'm summarizing. This gives me options for how I can adjust this field, and one of them is called value field settings. I can also get to this by right-clicking anywhere inside of my pivot table data, and you'll see that third from the bottom, I have value field settings here as well. They both take me to the same place. Basically, the name of the, again, column in my pivot, or I should say the name of the field that I'm working with, and then the summary function that it's using. I'm going to adjust mine to average. Notice that it updates the name. And then in addition to that, in the bottom left-hand corner, I can reformat the field. I'm going to click on this and it takes me in so that instead of just being formatted as a general number, I can adjust it and have it be formatted as a currency. I can also decide whether it has decimals, and I'm going to click on OK. So again, I'm updating my, function to an average, and now I'm making it be formatted as a currency to make it easier for me to look at it and understand what it's showing me. Now, if I adjust some of the fields, for example, let's say I take the office field off of my pivot, and then I take the destination field and drag it down to rows, it does not change that summary function. It's continuing to do an average and continuing to format it as a currency. Now, what are some additional things I can do to reformat my pivot table? First of all, I'm going to click inside of it, and then I'm going to come up to the contextual ribbons, specifically the pivot table design ribbon. On this ribbon, I'm going to see some basic tools like the ability to update the style of the pivot table. This will just basically rechange the formatting, change the color, for example, of the row or column labels. In addition to that, though, I can decide if I have banded rows inside or banded columns inside my pivot. I can also decide if I'm going to have those grand totals at the top, I should say at the right and at the bottom. Notice I can turn those off if I don't want them. So there's some great options here for being able to adjust how your pivot table is formatted. Again, if you want to try these out, go to the practice files folder, open up Pivot 4a, and try again adjusting the summary function of your pivot table and also the format. Hey everybody, welcome back. I'm ready to look at how I can sort, filter, and edit my pivot table. Now right here I have pivot table 3 open. If you go to the practice files folder and open up pivot table 3-A, you can follow right along and try editing and filtering and sorting your own pivot table. Now I'm going to click inside my pivot table. You'll notice I'm on sheet 1 because that's where my pivot table is located. And when I click outside my pivot table, one thing to notice is that your pivot table field list over here on the right will close. So click inside your pivot table and then you'll make sure that your pivot table field list will open up. Also, when you're in a pivot table, you do get 2 contextual tabs up here at the top, new ribbons. One called Pivot Table Analyze and the other one called Pivot Table Design. You will also only see these when you're clicked inside your pivot table. Now, our first focus is how can I filter my pivot table data? Well, when you have a pivot table, you will see that next to the rows, there is an arrow that looks a lot like the auto sorting and filtering arrows that we use in Excel. You can use this to come in and change your sort order for your rows from ascending to descending. The default is ascending. You can also use this to come in, for example, and I could do a filter where I only want to look for any of my offices that have an ST at the beginning of them. And you'll see here that it will filter as well. Notice the little funnel next to that auto sorting and filtering arrow. If I click on that, I can come down in the options of the menu and say clear filter from. I can do the same things for my column labels. I can adjust the sorting. I can also come in and uncheck items I don't want to see and just check off the ones that I do. Now, when I filter my pivot table, I am in no way adjusting my basic source data for the pivot table. If I come down and go back to the actual data source, I'll see that it's still intact and nothing has changed. So the pivot table really allows you to do a lot of changes, but your pivot table source data never adjusts. To turn a filter off, again, I'm just going to go back to the arrow and say clear filter from, and it updates. Now, what about filtering the entire pivot table, not just the rows or the columns? In this case, I'm going to come over to my pivot table, again, fields, and we'll see here that there is a filters area that I have not used. I'm going to come in and actually take the date field down to the filters area, and we'll see up here in cell A1 and B1 that I have a new field that's been added to my pivot table data. And this allows me to take my entire pivot table and filter by either a specific date in this case, or I can come in and notice at the bottom of the list, I can select multiple items. I can check off multiple dates, and it allows me to filter my pivot table by those specific dates. And this is a filter that applies to my entire pivot table. And that's one of the benefits of the filtering areas. Now, as always, if I want to adjust what is showing in my pivot table, I can make changes. I can take the destinations and drag them underneath my offices. Notice how interesting this is. Now I'm seeing basically what we call a stacked format, where I can see each of my offices with the different destinations that have been sold underneath of them, along with the ability to expand and collapse those. And I even have, in this case, some sub functions. And at the very bottom of my pivot table, I have a grand total. This is all part of what's built into a pivot table. Now, if I would like to change, for example, the values field, I can left drag the field that's there off. It doesn't delete it, it just removes it. Then instead, maybe I'm going to bring down, for example, the amount field. And we'll see that now I'm seeing the amount sold as opposed to the other field that was showing previously. So as you can see, it's very easy to adjust the fields, to sort and filter, and update the analysis that's going on in your pivot table. As always, we want you to try this out. So go into the practice files folder, open up Pivot 3a, and try filtering, editing, and sorting your pivot table data. Welcome back, everybody. We want to look at some of the cool things you can do to help you view date information in a pivot table. This is called grouping. I'm going to go ahead and zoom in on my pivot table just a little bit. You'll see right now that I have the offices showing and also the sum of the total for the tickets that have been sold inside my pivot table. And I'd like to see when this occurred. And it happens that in my pivot table data, I have a date field. One of the great things you can do is take this date field and add it as a column at the top of your pivot table. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take the date field and drag it down and drop it in the dates area of my pivot table. Remember, it's a pivot of my pivot table field list, I should say, and this is a left drag. You'll see the dates get added at the top. Now mine has automatically grouped these dates. If this doesn't happen, I want to show you how to do it because dates can be grouped by months, by quarters, and by years. And maybe I'd like to take these months or the individual dates and see them broken down into quarters. So what I'm going to do is click on any of the months. If you have individual dates showing, click on one of the dates. Now, for example, if I take the months off that are showing, then it shows the individual dates. And this is what some of you may be seeing. I've clicked on one of my dates, and then I'm going to come up and go to one of my pivot table contextual ribbons, the pivot table analyze ribbon specifically. On this ribbon, third from the left, is a group called group. I did not make that up. And there is a button here called group field. So the field that we're working with in our pivot table is, of course, our column labels, and it's a date. I'm going to click on that. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to include the months again and also quarters to the grouping that I have. And then I'm going to click on OK. Now what I'm going to see is that now I see the individual dates, but above that I see a month and then a quarter. Now I can click on the minus sign next to this, and what I'll see is that it will allow me to collapse the individual dates down so that I'm just seeing them grouped by date. And this also adjusts, again, the information for the summary function that it's doing. Now, above that, I have the different quarter totals that I can come in and group by. And again, the opportunity here is this allows me to see the data in different intervals of time. To turn this off, I would again click on one of those column labels, either a month or a quarter, and go back up to ungroup, and it would turn that grouping back to being turned off. This is a great way for you to view dated information, again, in different increments of time. As always, we'd love for you to try this out. So go into the practice files folder, open up Pivot 5a, and try adding some grouping on your column labels. Welcome back, everybody. We want to explore how you can turn on a really great filtering tool in an Excel pivot table called a slicer. Now, I know it sounds like a kind of soda pop, but it isn't. Slicers are just a faster, more visual way to filter pivot table data, especially useful for new users who may not be as familiar with the format and where things are located in pivot tables. So how do we create a slicer in our pivot table data? First of all, we need to come in and actually click inside one of the fields of our pivot table, and then come up to those contextual ribbons that turn on when you are inside your pivot table, specifically the one called Pivot Table Analyze. On the Pivot Table Analyze ribbon, about the fourth ribbon in from the left, you will see a Filter group, and on the far left-hand side, an Insert Slicer button. When we click on this, we're going to see the Insert Slicer dialog appear, and it shows a list of all the different column headings from our source data. We need to select the specific fields that we filter by the most. I'm going to check off date and also destination and click on OK. When I'm finished, I'm going to see two filtering buckets called slicers appear. Now I can click on the edges of these because they're like a picture, and I can move them around on my spreadsheet. I can also come to the corners and make them bigger or smaller depending on my needs. But the idea is that I'm going to see something I want to filter by in the slicer list, and then I'm going to click on it. As I do this, I will see my pivot table will actually filter in place for me directly on the left. To unfilter, I'm going to come to the top right-hand corner and I'll see a funnel with an X. I'm going to click on that and it will turn the filter off. To filter by more than one item in my slicer, I can click on the first item. If they're right next to each other, I can hold down my Shift key to filter by multiple items. Or if they're not right next to each other, I can click on the first item and then hold down my Control key to click on items that are non-adjacent, and it allows me to filter. So again, slicers are just basically a visual opportunity to filter your pivot table and easier for people that are newer or not so familiar with, again, pivot tables to work with. If you'd ever like to turn a filter or a slicer off, click on it so it's selected, and then hit the delete key on your keyboard. It's not going to delete any of your data. It's just going to turn off the slicer so that it's not taking up room in your spreadsheet. Try this out. Go in, open up pivot table 6, or I should say the file pivot 6a from the practice files folder, and try adding some slicers to it. Hey everybody, welcome back. We need to discuss a really important element with pivot tables, and that is the fact that they do not automatically refresh when their source data is updated. So I'm going to click in my pivot table so that I can see my pivot table field list. And then I'm going to come back into my Breezy Wins promo sales sheet. This is where my source data for my pivot table is located. And let's say that, for example, a few of the dates in my pivot table change, because maybe they were incorrect. And so I've come in and I've updated these dates. And this means that my pivot table data needs to update as well. But I changed the data in my source data. And when I go back to my pivot table, this data may not automatically update. So what I need to do to ensure that my pivot table data is always up to date with my source data, I need to refresh it. So to refresh, I'm going to right-click anywhere in my pivot table data and come to refresh. I can also go up to my pivot table Analyze contextual ribbon, and in the middle of this ribbon is a data group, and on the data group, I also have a refresh button. It's very important to remember that your pivot table will not automatically update if its source data updates. You need to make sure you refresh it. And this is something we're not used to because in normal Excel spreadsheets, everything refreshes, including formulas and charts when we make a change. So remember to refresh your data. And if you want to try this out on your own, open up pivot table 7-A from the practice files and make sure you refresh your pivot table data. Hey everybody, welcome back. We are finally ready to create a pivot chart. Now, whether you have a pivot chart or a pivot table, you need to know that you can't have a pivot chart without a pivot table. It's kind of like the chicken and egg argument. When you create a pivot chart, a pivot table will automatically be created to go with it. One of the reasons that pivot charts are so useful is they allow you to take, again, a data set that has many columns that's really wide and create charts from it. A normal chart would not work well with this data because there's too many columns of information. With a pivot chart, I can pick the specific columns out of the data and chart those while the rest of the data is left alone. So let's go ahead and create our first pivot chart. I'm going to click anywhere inside my source data and go up to my Insert Ribbon tab. And then I'm going to come to the Charts group. And on the far right-hand side, I will see the Pivot Chart button. Now, this is one of those two buttons in one that Microsoft loves to do. The top half will take you immediately to the Insert Pivot Chart. The bottom half lets you decide how you want to go. We're just going to click on the top half. The first part is to select the correct data or range for your pivot chart. Notice that mine has already selected all my data because, again, it's set up to be created into a pivot table. The second choice is whether my new pivot chart will go on a new sheet or an existing worksheet. New worksheet is the default. Then I'm going to click on OK. Now, this looks like the same process as creating a pivot table, but notice I have an area also for a pivot chart. And then over on the right, it's not called a pivot field list anymore. It's a pivot chart field list. Also, rather than columns and rows, my pivot chart fields have legends and axes, referring to that chart idea. But just like a pivot table, I drag the fields to where I want them to go in my chart. So I'm going to start by taking destination down to my axes, and then I'm going to take one of my value fields, total, and drag it to my values. As soon as I do that, I already have a pivot chart created here. Now the pivot chart is like a normal chart. It can be moved, it can be sized. Also, you'll see that in some cases, I can actually come in and I can actually filter the data in my pivot chart by using the actual little arrows right next to some of the fields. Notice the little funnel now representing that my chart is filtered. To turn that off, I can click, come in and say clear filter from, and it turns it off. Sometimes a pivot chart will take a little bit of time to update just because your source data may be so large. Now, in addition, I can change my pivot chart quickly by taking one field off. For example, I can come in and drag my destination field off and drag my office field down instead. And now I'm going to be pivoting a different set of information in my pivot chart. As I make these changes, the pivot table that the chart's also in connection with automatically updates. Now, when it comes to changing the formatting of my pivot chart, in the top right-hand corner, I have a chart elements that allows me to come in, for example, and add data labels or even adjust the grid lines of my pivot table. Maybe I want to add some primary minor grid lines. In addition, I can also update the format by going to the paintbrush and changing things like the style and also the color of my pivot chart. But the formatting is not going to actually change the data that is being formatted in my pivot chart. Now, finally, what if I have a pivot table and I would like to make a pivot chart from that table? I'm going to take this existing pivot table that I have here and move it over just a little bit. To create a pivot chart after a pivot table's already been created, I'm going to click inside the pivot table. I'm going to come up to the pivot table analyze contextual ribbon, and I'm going to come into the tools group on the right-hand side and select pivot chart. This will actually take me into where I select the type of chart it is that I want. And then after I do that, you'll notice I get a new pivot chart based on the information in my pivot table. If I want to adjust it, I can come in after I click on the pivot table and I can pick different fields, for example, but keep in mind that if I edit the one pivot chart, the data in the other pivot chart is also going to edit because they're both based on the same pivot table. And also remember at any time, if your source data updates, to make sure your pivot charts and your pivot table are also up to date, you need to right click and come in and refresh the data so that you can make sure that you're always going to be up to date with the information that's showing. And as always, if you go to a pivot chart and hit the delete button, it's not going to delete your source data or your pivot table because the chart is, again, just a visual representation of what's in your pivot table and, more importantly, what's in your source data. As always, if you want to try this out, please go to the practice files folder, open up Pivot 7a, and try making your own pivot chart. Hey everybody, thank you so much for joining us for this Excel Intro to Data Analytics course. We've spent time looking at how to create and edit table styles. We've also played with a bunch of the if functions, including SUMIF, COUNTIF, and AVERAGEIF. And then we spent some time looking at how to create charts. And finally, we ended up in pivot tables and looked at how you can use pivot tables to analyze and also even chart your data with pivot charts. Please join us for more soon.